Hello everyone, welcome to North and South Podcasts. This is Tim speaking. As you can see, I've got some music, so I've finally got round to it, and I've credited the music in the podcast notes. It took me about 2 hours of my precious time, which I haven't got, but it was worth it in the end. I've also got COVID-19 for the second time. Now, I know COVID isn't real and it doesn't exist, and it's all made up by a huge international conspiracy of scientists and drug companies and governments to take away all our powers, etcetera. But I've somehow still managed to get it, which really does defy logic, really. So I'm currently in the house alone, and I've got a little bit of time to do some podcasting. And I want to talk about podcasting today because, by the way, I've been triple vaccinated because I'm immunosuppressed. So I've got to be careful. And I'm doing okay. I had a fever last night, but generally I'm okay. I'm just a bit tired, so it doesn't seem to be as severe as the last time I had it. But today I'm going to talk about podcasting because I was introduced to podcasting. I've heard people talk about podcasting for a few years, but I first got recommended a podcast directly through my good friend Tim Sputz, my acupuncturist, and he told me about a podcast, and he always gives me good advice, Tim. And he told me about a podcast called the Buxton podcast, which is like comedy but also serious at times, with hints of comedy. And I listened to that and really enjoyed it. And I think that was about 2.5 years ago. And since then, podcasts have kind of become a big part of my life. I've stopped listening to music, and I've stopped watching TV news, which can be quite depressing at times. I still do listen to music, and I still do sometimes catch the news on TV, but I generally listen to podcasting now for news, for comedy, for cultural stuff, a whole host of things that I'm into. So this podcast is about podcasting, it's just me speaking. So thanks, Tim, for that recommendation. I also want to thank Paul Dorgan, who was on here a few weeks ago on a previous podcast. Check out that podcast. Paul Dorgan does the excellent Mersey Talk podcast and has done 11 episodes so far, and I really enjoyed them, and he kind of inspired me to do this. So I had one of those moments. As I've said before, I listened to a podcast about 2 years ago, just after the first COVID lockdown came in, and it was called the Doorstep Mile podcast, and the guy who did it wrote a book, and it was about basically making changes in your life and making the start of crossing the doorstep and beginning something, and how that can often be the most difficult step to take, and once you've started it you can kind of keep going, you've got a bit of momentum, etc. So I've been having a little think about things during COVID and lockdown, etc. I've been teaching for 23 years, I've got my health problems, as I've spoken about before, but I said to myself, I'm going to do a podcast. Now, I kind of want to be a writer, and I've got a few little things that I'm interested in. But as Chris Snellgrove said on the podcast a few weeks ago, like, you'll find one thing that you're good at, and you should stick at that. Regardless of what you want, certain things come naturally to you. Now, I'm not saying that podcasting comes naturally to me, but I am enjoying it, and I am enjoying the feedback. So thanks to Lisa for feedback. Thanks to Steve for the coffee donation and the kind words. Coffee donation. Thanks to Harvey. Thanks to Mar. All the people who've given me good feedback over the last few months. It really has been appreciated. The more you share it, the more you listen to it, the more you financially support me through coffee.com, which is fine if you don't, because I listen to lots of podcasts, but I only financially contribute to 4, so I don't really practice what I preach. But those 4, I don't resent those contributions. Is it 5? I think it's 5. I don't resent those contributions because I get something from those podcasts, which is far more than the money which I give towards them. So using Patreon or using subscription services, I listen to 5 podcasts that I pay for, and I listen to the others for free on Spotify, on Podcast Addict, and I listen to the Sticky Notes podcast through, I think it's through Podcast Addict, but you can't really download it there. I don't know if it's moved to Spotify now, but that's a good podcast as well. Now, I know some people had advertising on and all that. As you know, this is about well-being. It's about creativity. It's about history. It's about survival, financial survival in these hard times. But it's also about politics. And some people have said to me, you want to be careful with that because you're going to peeve some people off. And I get that. But at the end of the day, my political beliefs would shine through. As far as I'm concerned, they're low-hanging fruit that hardly anyone can disagree with. So Boris Johnson is useless and completely incompetent, and corruption has become endemic at the heart of the British state, and we need to get rid of the current crew in Downing Street and in Parliament, and I would recommend any other party take over, because as Mark Twain said, underwear and politicians, it's often attributed to Mark Twain, this quote, but I don't know if it is. Politicians and underwear need changing regularly for the same reasons. And I want to also touch on, I'll be careful how I say this, but there are certain areas of the country and certain parts of the world where you have the same people in power for the long term, and I think that can be quite unhealthy. Yeah, I believe in democracy. Yeah, people think democracy is an absolute, that justice is an absolute. They're not. Democracy is like a light. It can be stronger, it can be dimmer. But if you don't have a democratic election every now and again where you can get rid of the current government. Now, we know that governments sell their souls to the devil, and corporations and private interests dominate politics, but we need means by which to get rid of them peacefully. And if we don't, things can be bad. That's not to say it's all great in the democracies. I mean, apart from the Scandinavian democracies, maybe Canada, maybe in the Antipodes, are there many democracies, maybe Switzerland, that you would like to live in? Possibly Germany, France. I was speaking to someone the other day about the veil of ignorance argument, whereby if, I think it was John Rawls, the liberal political philosopher, said that before you judge a society, you need to imagine what it's like to be in that society if you are the average person. And of course, then we could get into the traditions of law should do the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people, which was argued by Jeremy Bentham and then refined by John Stuart Mill, who said that doesn't mean that you can step all over minorities, as it were, which are often an easy target in any country to pick on minorities and oppressed people, and to use the poor me argument on a group which tends to be more successful and say, oh, look, do you want these people being treated better than you? Are you having such a great life? Which I remember being spoken particularly well in the film Selma, where Martin Luther King, after they arrived at Selma, Alabama, after that march, which was famously blocked a few times by the police, that there's a great lie sold to people that if you let the people below you get to your level, you are more diminished. And that is the great lie which is sold to try and justify the oppression of minorities. And again, it depends how you go about helping those minorities, do it in the right way. But envy and bitterness is a big part of politics and a big part of human nature. Now, I know I said this was going to be a podcast about podcasting, but I just wanted to defend why politics is so important to me, because if you live in a country under the veil of ignorance, whereas you're the average person, and if you live in a world where dictatorships and authoritarian governments start to become more dominant, they haven't got the liberal democracies of the world keeping an eye on them. And yeah, a lot of teachers go to Middle East dictatorships where they're actually treated better than teachers are in the United Kingdom, which is a sad indictment of government policy in recent years. But it's not a simple case of democracy good, dictatorship bad. You can have dictators who can be quite good and have the finger on the pulse. But when you have countries where there are enough feedback loops and pressure valves whereby people can pass on information and concern down and up, that is not good government. And I'd like to think that what Martin Luther King said about the arc of justice generally moves towards progress throughout history. It's nice to believe that, and I'll always stand up for those positions. People often say, it's like, what do you stand for and all that, and I could say, well, I'm a bit of a socialist, I'm a bit of a liberal. I have quite broad opinions on different things. At times I believe in the individual taking responsibility and becoming empowered in terms of well-being, but also as an individual I know what it's like just trying to cope and being able to buy a house, particularly when you've got a disability in a Western democracy, how difficult that can be. And you're thinking, well, wasn't there a core belief after the war, up until maybe the oil crisis of the 70s and even beyond, the New Labour myth or belief that if you work hard you can get somewhere in life? And since the credit crunch 2007, we've had 15 years now where working hard and aiming high can really be difficult in terms of getting to the average in society. And of course we know that societies with inequality tend to be more resentful because people compare themselves with others. So I believe in equality. I believe in individuals being central to things, but we also need to look at how we are as societies and groups, and the groups that you belong in and identify with can be empowering too, but you shouldn't just identify with a group and go along with all the ideas that might involve. Who's to say that if you're in a particular group you have to follow a particular set of ideas? I believe in flexibility in terms of that, and that political parties and society should be plural and broad churches where a number of different things can be brought to the fore. I also believe that in the UK we need political reform. We need first past the post. We need a system where each vote counts. At the moment we don't, so it's easier to gerrymander, move borders, use voter suppression, use your friends in the media, corporations, to get your narrative across. And I think that is sad and that is counter-democratic. And libertarians and people on the right say, oh, it's not the role of the government to say certain people can't spend money to influence politics. Well, what does that make politics? Something that's sold to the highest bidder. That is not good enough. And I'll say one thing about the UK. The government gets criticised in some sectors of the media and in Parliament. And if that goes, we'll find ourselves in a bit of a pickle. Also, if the NHS goes, we'll find ourselves in a bit of a pickle. There are a lot of people who believe that we should go down the route of the United States, the Republic of Ireland. No. There may be reforms needed. You can look to Australia and other countries around the world for alternatives to the way we do things. But starving the NHS, privatising it by stealth, and just because you're in a party that tends to be run by very wealthy people who tend to be millionaires, not even going to get started on Rishi Sunak and Johnson and all these elitist people who were born to rule, the lack of meritocracy in this country. I'm not even going to get started on that. I do think Keir Starmer needs to up his game a lot as the leader of the opposition. At the end of the day, you need to be convincing in Parliament for that side of things. You also need to have a cohesive message. And I know we haven't got an election coming up. I think it's important that Labour find a voice, and also the other opposition parties find a voice. And if necessary, they work together. I've been very disappointed recently with supposed people on the supposed left with the support of Russia over the Ukraine, and this kind of, or if we had Jeremy Corbyn and all this, everything would be fine. And I don't doubt that Corbyn and the Labour government would have been much better than this crew. But we need to move beyond that now and move forward. And I think the internet has really exposed what you might call extremist voices just doubling down online and doubling down in the beliefs because they hear other people who have similar beliefs who reinforce them. And the behaviour of people online in political discussions, particularly on Twitter, is absolutely disgusting. Don't think it brings anything to the debate. Sorry, was this meant to be about podcasts or me going off on one about politics? Podcasting has become quite commercial in recent years on some platforms, etc. And I listened to a podcast by Blindboy. If you don't listen to the Blindboy podcast, you should check it out. It's really good. He's just been diagnosed with autism, Blindboy. And he wears a carrier bag over his head to maintain his privacy. And he's got millions of subscribers. And he talks about mental health sometimes. He does like hot takes on particular things to do with music, culture. He used to be in a band. He still tours sometimes. And the Blindboy podcast is excellent. And he's a bit of a hero of mine because, as well as being like neurodivergent and very creative, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm diagnosed as being neurodivergent, but I am very creative, and he's someone who's done well going down that path and being true to himself. And he always says on his podcast, support all independent podcasts, and I can't echo that enough. So thanks to Tim for getting me into podcasts. Thanks to Paul Dargan for being an inspiration. Thanks to Blindboy for that message and for doing an excellent podcast. He really is good and you should check him out. He really is quite unusual as well, Blindboy, in terms of the things he talks about, etc. Very, very interesting. So support independent podcasts, support coffee.com, North and South podcasts if you can. I would like to have an office like Blindboy one day and have a team doing good in the world. And I don't just mean in terms of podcasting, in terms of like working with Hope Street, who I've been very proud to work with, the wellbeing charity in Ormskirk in the northwest of England, working closely with them and getting involved in the community generally in the northwest and around the world. I love it. I love doing the podcast, and I really do. It's took me a while to find a voice. Some of your listeners might say, well, you haven't found it yet. But I do feel like I have found a place where I can talk and hopefully resonate with others on my terms while still being responsive to others. So I love it. As I said earlier, I'm 44. I've got a young son. And I need to look at myself in the mirror now and think, who am I? What are you doing with your life? And everyone out there, I would urge yourself now and again to just write down what you want in your life. Think about relationships, what matter to you. Think about career. Think about what you do in your spare time. Think about what you want to be a part of and contribute to. Those four broad headings. I've said this before. What you want to achieve in life. What's your plan? Come up with a plan. If necessary, come up with little steps to move towards that plan. I've started doing yoga every morning. It's not easy some days. I can't be bothered. I always feel better when I do it. Just do 10 minutes every morning. And getting up at 10 to 6 can be hard to do it on a work day, but I'm better when I do it. So it's about discipline now. And I've got there. So what do you want in life? What are you going to do? Who are you? What's your identity? Are you a smoker or a non-smoker? If you're a non-smoker, you won't smoke because you just don't identify with smoking. Yeah, there's addictions to get over, but write down what you want to be, and if smoking's something that you want to give up, get started. What are your passions? What are you into? You know, I love art, literature. You know what other things I'm into in terms of what I'm into on this podcast. I do like researching for the podcast. I'd like to spend more time researching. I'd like to be able to buy better equipment. I have got a headset, a computer, mics. I've paid for particular software on the computer to help me to do this. So I'd like to do more of that, but obviously I would like to get an office one day, work with others, and expand in terms of being a positive change in the community. By community, I don't just mean at a local level, I mean globally. And that isn't with delusions of grandeur, but just maybe just reaching out beyond your immediate surroundings. Apologies for the odd sniff and cough, etc. If you want to get involved and say, Tim, I'd like to come onto your podcast, or I know people who would like to come on, or I'd like to help you with it. Get involved if you're a sound engineer or you're good with equipment. Thanks to Martin, by the way, for helping me with the mics recently. I really do appreciate that. It's a bit of a head wreck, me getting my head round how all the mics click in. It was quite straightforward in the end, but man, I do appreciate that. It's been a real privilege as well, some of the people I've spoken to, to get me mum and dad recorded, which is something I've been thinking about doing for a while. They're both in the 70s now, and I said I wanted to get something there for posterity. My granddad, on my mum's side, died in 2005, and I did a recording with him in 2001, and it chewed up. He was fought in North Africa during the war for 5 years, and I lost that. And then I did a couple of online interviews with me nan, which I'm going to get through Facebook when it comes up, the memories bit. So I'm going to get the audio for that and release that on this podcast, and then that's preserved, because again, she's no longer with us. 2016 she died, and she worked in the factories during World War II in Kirby, making ammunitions, etc. And those stories, within a few generations, they can be lost and forgotten. So I've spoken to family, I've spoken to some amazing people. I'm not going to mention all of them, but the people I've spoken to so far have been absolutely amazing. And Dave as well, I want to thank Dave for approaching me about coming on. Dave spoke about giving up alcohol completely, and it was a very, very pertinent and inspirational message that he gave. I really appreciated that. But I've spoken to some amazing people, and again, I want to work closer with Hope Street moving forward. Chris, who spoke the other week, is a Hope Street member. I spoke to Sheila, the founder, and there'll be more people from Hope Street coming on talking about their journeys in the future as well. So if you want to get involved, great. If you want to support me in any way you can, great. I might put the rest of my song on at the end of this podcast, but I'll keep this to 24 minutes. I didn't think it would be this long, to be honest with you, and I'm going to edit another podcast while I've got time. I did a great podcast last week with Joanna Habeck, who is a Kundalini yoga teacher, and even if you're not into yoga, you should listen to that podcast, because she talks about the philosophy and the ideas behind yoga. It's a very interesting discussion, so I would recommend that. That'll be coming up soon. Also, I'm going to be speaking to someone else from Hope Street really soon. And just want to say thanks as well to the Big Onion lads who I spoke to the other week, who are Merseyside Expanding Horizons. Very, very powerful message. And I would urge you to get down to the Big Onion in Buxton to support them, support all the people who come on, and look out for each other, folks, because although COVID, I remember listening to a specialist scientist whose name begins with A, people who were specialists in disease, epidemiologist, is it? A few years, 2 years ago, and he said, this will last. He said the first one will last for 2 years, and then there'll be another 2 years where things become a little bit more normalised. And I remember thinking, recently, he was right. Omicron was kind of the beginning of the less severe stage, the initial 2 years. Plus, we had a huge breakthrough with the vaccines very early on. We were very lucky with that, the way that they've panned out. I know there's issues about how they're applied globally, but I was listening the other day to some scientists saying that coronavirus, the common cold is a coronavirus, and soon this will be a common cold, or just something you get from time to time, and will build up immunity, and human beings will get used to it. etc. But it has caused a lot of upset, and it has had a big impact on us all. But it's nice to see that we've kind of got to a point where things are looking better. Now, we're still not out the woods. There was huge errors made early on. There's also been huge successes, particularly the vaccines. I think that's been particularly successful. But moving forward to a post-COVID world, if you like, we need to get back to normal. We need to also start having a word with ourselves about all these conspiracy theories and stuff that some of the things I've read online and heard online from people, absolutely terrifying. Now, maybe people used to think things like this, but they never had social media to like echo it and enhance it and to gain momentum. And we know negative news spreads quicker. We also know that social media can be used to encourage genocides and has been done, and huge issues. But I believe in the human project, and I hope that we can move into a post-COVID state. We've got to be careful that we don't allow our health services to be inundated again, even with lower levels of severity of COVID. But hopefully we can keep moving forward and keep developing. That's all we can ask for. Listen, I wanted to speak about podcasts today, which is like culture and creativity, but it's turned into a bit of a political thing and also a general chat about whatever. But hopefully you've got something from it. You can contact me if you know me, or through my Twitter account at North and South Podcasts. At North Podcasts, it is on Twitter. So follow me on there. Contribute to coffee.com if you can. It might just be a little bit to you, like the price of a coffee once a month, but it actually means a lot to me and me moving forward. So thanks everyone, and have a great Easter weekend, and just try and enjoy the little things each day. Get up positively. Let's wake up positively. Get that right. Makes the rest of the day easier. Take it easy, everyone. See you later.